Good afternoon and welcome to Webinar Wednesday. Today, we are joined by David Guthrie, Principal Biomed Customer Success Manager at Claroty, and Joe Welker, Senior Customer Success Manager at Claroty. Webinar Wednesday would like to thank our sponsor, Claroty. As the world's most trusted healthcare cybersecurity company, Claroty empowers HDOs to comprehensively monitor and manage risk across their healthcare extended Internet of Things environment. Whether it be through a medical device or a building management system, attack surfaces grow as connected assets expand, creating security blind spots that pose risk to availability, integrity, and safety. Claroty tackles these risks to ensure cyber and operational resilience are within your reach. Visit claroty.com to learn more about this week's sponsor. Just a reminder about our Fall MD Expo, which will be held at the Renaissance Dallas Addison Hotel in Dallas, Texas, from November 10th to 12th. Join us for 3 days of education, networking, and the latest advances in medical technology. For more information, registration details, and event details, please visit mdexposhow.com. Okay, today's webinar is eligible for 1 CE credit from the ACI. You can obtain your CE certificate by completing the post-webinar survey. The survey will be emailed 1 hour after the completion of today's presentation. You must complete the survey to receive your 1 CE credit. And you will be able to download the certificate directly from your computer once the survey is submitted. If you have any questions, you can reach us at webinar@mdpublishing.com. Now, for a little fun, let's kick off today's webinar by giving away a Swiss Force multi-tool. So using the questions feature on your dashboard, let me know the answer to the following trivia question. September is National Honey Month. Which state is known as the honey state? I'll reveal the answer and our winner at the end of today's webinar. We'll wrap up today's presentation with a live Q&A. Please submit your questions anytime using the question feature on your webinar dashboard. And as I mentioned earlier, our presenters today are David Guthrie and Joe Welker. So David, you may begin whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Well, it's a pleasure having everybody on the call today and hope you get a lot out of our webinar today. I do want to emphasize, yes, Joe and I are from Claroty, but a lot of the concepts that you're going to see in here are applicable no matter what system or technology that you're using. And we'll start off with some brief introductions. Joe, why don't you kick it off?
All right, thanks for joining us, everyone. My name is Joe Welker. I'm a customer success manager at Claroty. I've been here for about 2.5 years. Prior to that, I had 16 years in healthcare IT and clinical engineering in a healthcare organization in Pennsylvania. The last 6 years there, I was the program director for the medical device integration cybersecurity team and used tools like Claroty to operationalize our medical device security program. David?
Thank you. And I'm Dave Guthrie. I'm the Principal Biomed Customer Success Manager here at Claroty. Been at the organization here for almost 2.5 to 2 3/4 years about. And then prior to here, spent 10 years at Mass General Brigham, which is the largest care provider in the New England area, and was their medical device cybersecurity program manager and built their program for both research and operations across the organization. So involved with a lot of the operational activities, policy development, and management of the device systems, as well as all kinds of fun research with regards to doing penetration testing, assessment of new technologies, and developing a state-of-the-art cyber range. Prior to that, did another 10 years of medical research, doing brain-computer interfacing and neuroprosthetic systems and all kinds of fun mathematics and things applying to brain signals. So looking forward to today's webinar, and we'll kick it off with a quick agenda. So this is a pretty packed agenda. We're going to go through some higher level concepts here. We may not hit on every one of these topics, but we're happy to also meet with you and discuss more after the webinar and answer any questions you may have. So as far as the agenda, we're going to start off with talking about inventory management within the healthcare setting and what's the advantage of doing smart biomedical device inventory management. How do you build out this comprehensive asset inventory using automated tools, as well as understanding what goes into this inventory with patch levels and upgrading and those kind of facets, branching then further into use cases of going into how you can do utilization tracking, procurement decisions, and those kind of pieces with this data, and then following out with location awareness and wireless tracking for when you're going through PMs or other aspects where having an automated tool can really help decrease your cycle time, and then close out with your future professional development, as well as what are the implications of why are we doing this and what can be caused if you do have a breach? What are the repercussions? So, Joe?
All right. So as biomedical engineers, you sit at the intersection of clinical care and technology, ensuring that the devices are not just functional, but they're safe and secure. And as cyber threats increasingly target healthcare, the role of biomeds has been evolving. Initially, medical device security was very reactive and involved lots of fire drills. Whatever was in the news, you had to quickly respond to, gather data, and figure out what you're going to do with it. But as you seek to increase the effectiveness and the maturity of your medical device cybersecurity program and to deal with things more efficiently, we have to shift to a more proactive strategy, and one that reduces the cyber risk of these medical devices while understanding the resource constraints that you deal with every day. So this evolution brings some additional responsibilities, but if you leverage technology effectively, you build strong relationships within your organization's IT and information security departments, you can limit those resources and efforts that are needed to be successful. So as we go through the rest of our presentation today, we're going to talk about the importance of having a very comprehensive asset inventory, and then we'll talk about what you can do with that data and how it helps to build the foundation of a medical device cybersecurity program, but also some of the other advantages of having that kind of data available to you. So we'll talk about things such as utilization and procurement strategies, as well as just some of the benefits of having the context from the technology within your inventory for your day-to-day work.
Okay, so let's get into what's the current state of inventory management versus inventory 2.0 using automated tools. So as biomedical engineers, you are all very well aware of a lot of the manual tasks and tracking of systems that it requires to make sure you have a comprehensive inventory of your medical devices. This goes into information about the devices. You also have your PM dates, what's the status of your wireless certificates, and all the other pieces that go in there. It's a lot of manual work. However, in Inventory 2.0, what you can use technologies like Claroty, and it doesn't have to be Claroty, but technologies like it, you can have automated tools that integrate with your CMMS system and will be able to gather information about like MAC address, IP address, location, what access point, what switch is it connected to, what kind of software version, hardware version, operating system, what's the end of life status, what are the vulnerability and risk states, what are the network configurations and compensating controls around that device, and how can you overall reduce the risk of that device based on recommendations within the platform. All of this kind of data can be then fed into your CMMS automatically. And likewise, the CMMS can feed data into a platform like this and provide additional information on business unit information, financial information. You have your serial numbers and any asset tag numbers and all those kinds of pieces. You can have a very holistic inventory that is a lot more comprehensive than your typical biomed inventory that you're using for tracking today.
So with all of that extra information that you're looking to pull in, you're going to be able to do a variety of things with it that you weren't available. You're going to be able to do a lot of things that you weren't able to do before. So one of the things that you're going to be able to do with that information is you're going to have an understanding of the operating system and the firmware version of those devices. And you can use that information to determine what are the vulnerabilities present on this device, what are the risks that are inherent to this device, and what are the controls that are in place to reduce that risk. So as you're managing the life cycle of these devices, part of that is making sure that whenever there's a vulnerability, that the patches are available from the manufacturer. And when those patches become available from the manufacturer, that they get installed in an effective manner. So using this information, integrating it with your inventory allows you to see what those opportunities are, what the risks are, and then you can use that information to streamline and prioritize your processes so that with the limited resources you might have available, you're taking the actions that are going to result in the greatest impact at controlling and reducing risk. In addition to that kind of information around security, you also have the ability to see, are your devices being utilized effectively? So you're looking at the ability to reduce inventory costs if you have leased devices that aren't being used effectively. You've got data that can help inform those decisions. Do we need to continue renting devices? Or is our population of infusion pumps sufficient for the demand that we have within our organization? You can also look at devices individually. Some of your higher revenue generating devices, you're going to get a good picture of the utilization for those and use that information to pass on to clinical leaders so they understand where opportunities for additional revenue generation might exist. In addition to that information, you've got location data. So both wired and wireless information can be associated with the devices. So when you're working on finding devices that are wireless, you can see that device's location potentially overlaid on a floor plan that is embedded within your wireless management system. You don't have to reach out to the network team to say, hey, where is this device connected? Where was it last seen? So you're reducing the demand you have on other departments, but also you're empowering yourself to have that information available at your fingertips. In addition to that location tracking, you can find out when the devices are moving around where they're not supposed to. So if you're in an organization with multiple facilities, you have experienced it where a device will jump on an ambulance or a helicopter and move from one facility to the next, and then whenever you're looking for it, when it comes up for PM, it's just one of those devices that goes missing for a while. You could be alerted on those types of location changes whenever you've got that context available to you and presented to you in your inventory.
So I think the important part in summation of everything that Joe just talked about is you're able to have a one-stop shop for bringing all different data sources from across your organization into one place. And this reduces your need to reach out to other teams. It makes you be able to have faster response times, less effort, and overall higher efficiency as a team. So as Joe was just talking about, your location data can come in from integrations with your RTLS gateways as well as your network management systems, and those can vary from your wireless LAN controllers and your overall network controllers for your wired and other connected systems. You have your EMR and device logs and PACS information all combined together to give you utilization data, so you can know when are procedures being done, when is this device sending network traffic, when is it being used, what are the typical operating hours of this device, so you can plan activities such as updates and maintenance and other pieces like that. Do capacity planning of is there certain equipment that is being overloaded, and maybe there's like for example, an MRI system that is just constantly seeing patients, but you have an MRI either within the same campus or maybe at another campus that is not nearly as busy. You can see that level of detail and triage patients over to the other system. You can also make plans for future capacity needs. If you don't have enough inventory, you can see that through the utilization metrics and understand what is the capacity needs. Likewise, you can also see how many devices are online, offline, utilized per day, all those kinds of pieces. So you can take a look at your whole inventory of a device fleet and see how many devices on a given day are being utilized and do I have any capacity needs, or is there lots of room? Likewise, with the inventory piece, as I described before, with the integration with the CMMS, you have that data coming in, such as your additional business data and your last PM date, your serial numbers, your asset tags, and those kind of pieces, combining with the inspection of the network traffic, where we can then pick up on the software and hardware versions, the operating system and the location and all kinds of network characteristics, vulnerability states, risk states, all those kinds of different pieces, all coming into a central place. And then through having all this data at your fingertips, not only can you improve the efficiency of your day-to-day activities, but you can also then look at where are we as a team in terms of industry benchmarks and be able to see, is there room for growth? Are we awesome and we're just knocking it out of the ballpark? And then lastly, through all of that, recommendations for growth. The system can then recommend how you can improve your efficiencies, how you can improve your security, and how you can have other cost constraints reduced.
So when we're talking about the life cycle of a device, as I mentioned before, the first thing you need to worry about is the visibility. You need to understand, is this device at the latest firmware version that I expect it to be for my fleet of devices? So without that visibility, you can't answer that question. So as we're planning for activities such as preventative maintenance, you have that information available to you within a system that's integrated with your inventory, so that you don't have to find that device to know what activities are going to be required when you go and sit in front of that device or you bring it into the shop. You know, this device needs a firmware update. It's one of the ones that we missed the last time around. So I need to account for that whenever I'm planning how much time this PM is going to take. In addition to that, you might see that there's an opportunity to install endpoint security, and having the information available that says the manufacturer approves endpoint security on this device, but it isn't installed today. You can use that information to make suggestions for additional hardening activities that can take place when the device is already in front of you, saving you from having to do that activity later in the year, and it makes for a much more efficient process. In addition to having that kind of information, you've got the location details. So for those devices that do move around, whether they're wired or wireless, the location data is going to help you get to that device faster. Sometimes finding the device takes just as much time as the PM can. So having location data available is going to point you to the device faster. And also for those devices that have been offline for a while, you can generate alerts when they come online and then get the latest location information, so that that one that's been hiding in a closet or stored in a drawer, you're aware of when it's online and get the latest location information, so that you don't have to mark something as lost or missing just because it's unable to be located manually. So when you get those devices in front of you, you're going to have the recommendations or the required actions to address certain conditions on the device, like a vulnerability that has a patch that's been approved from the manufacturer, or some credentials that are still the default credentials that you could change and make more secure, so that someone can't just use the local service account credentials that are found within the documentation to make changes on the device without the appropriate authorization. And then once you've made those changes, because you've got visibility into things like the operating system version of the firmware, whenever you change that, that information is going to get populated into your inventory, reducing the amount of time that it takes to document the changes you've made on the device and get that device back out into the clinical user's hands that much faster.
All right, and then I think we've talked about this a lot already, but one of the aspects that this kind of data can provide is not only understanding what your patch levels are, but identifying where do you have devices that may not be able to be upgraded? Where do you have devices that are end of life? Where do you have devices that are sending unencrypted PHI, for example, or have a out-of-date certificate for encryption, or maybe they are reaching out to being exposed on the internet and maybe have malicious communications or other pieces like that. So there's all these potential blind spots that you could have that may not be tracked within a traditional inventory that can be discovered through aggregation of these kinds of data together. And as well as it says on the screen here, the average time to patch medical devices is typically 82 days. And that's a result of not only the complexity of downtime and planning of the patching, but also because you need to have coordination with the manufacturer. Manufacturers need to certify the patches and ensure that it's not going to potentially break something. Whereas in a system like this, you can pull in information from the manufacturer, see the exact patch that can, for example, fix a certain vulnerability or risk, or recommend a compensating control that, for example, putting in an ACL or other network environmental controls around that device in order to make it more safe and secure, to give you time in order to be able to patch that device. So it reduces that risk profile for that device through other means, and that'll then allow you to work through this long tail cycle of getting the patches rolled out, because you may have a large fleet that has thousands of devices. That's going to take you a while.
So as I said before, the device utilization information is kind of a side benefit. Whenever you're collecting all of this data, you get information that's valuable from a security perspective, but also information that's valuable from a business perspective. So when we're talking about utilization, you can look at it from a fleet perspective as well as from an individual device perspective. Using infusion pumps as a fleet device example, a lot of the times the organization is looking to see, do they have the right number of devices? They hear anecdotal complaints about availability and things of that nature, and you can actually use data to analyze those types of concerns. Sometimes it's a rebalancing. If you have multiple locations, one site may not have enough where another site may have more. Rather than purchasing new ones, you can shift some of the inventory from the sites that have a surplus to the ones that are constantly utilizing them at close to 100%. So great from making sure that your fleet of devices is appropriate for the needs in your organization. And then looking at the individual device benchmarks, it helps with the clinical departments to determine whether or not they can justify purchasing additional equipment like imaging devices. And looking for opportunities to potentially shift patient load to areas where a device is being underutilized in one area, but that same model that's relatively close geographically is at peak utilization and there's still demand. So it's useful from that business perspective as well. And then some of the risk information we have can be used not just with the devices you have today, but the devices you're looking to purchase in the future, so that you can purchase devices that have some of the security controls in place that will make managing their risk more effective and more efficient. So if you use information such as the risk details that are available from MDS2 forums, you can find devices that may centralize some of the activities like patching, or may have certain controls that are built in by default that reduce the likelihood of exploitability of vulnerabilities. So that information is available to you, and you can use that as an additional benefit beyond just your day-to-day maintenance and security tasks.
And just to add on to that, another aspect that you can use a tool like this for is not only understanding the stock risk state come from the manufacturer, but you can use this to model potential controls that you can put into place, how that's going to reduce the risk, and then have a plan of how you're going to do your architecture design prior to ever implementing the device. So that can be a huge time saver, as well as hugely beneficial when you're doing a overall architecture of an entire fleet.
Yeah, that's a great point.
And location awareness and wireless tracking. So this can be useful, as we've talked about already in this presentation, when you're doing PMs and you want to know where's an entire fleet of devices such as infusion pumps. You want to track that down. It's going to overlay that onto location maps that are coming from your networking systems, and you can get it down to a pretty close radius of confidence of where that device is going to be beaconing from, or last known location. So for example, if you had a offline device that may be hiding in a closet somewhere, you want to know where was it last connected from, and that'll give you a radius of confidence. Likewise, with looking at the analysis of communication itself, you can do an assessment to understand, are there devices that are communicating together that seem out of the ordinary? Like, do you need to have a pulse oximeter or another device like well, yeah, let's stick with pulse oximeter because it's a pretty simplistic one. Does that need to be communicating with outbound servers, or does it need to be communicating with a printer? It makes sense for a radiology piece of equipment to be directly feeding an archiving system or going to a printer, but you're not typically going to be printing directly from a pulse ox. So should that kind of communication be blocked off because that's unnecessary risk within your organization? Or is it critical, and that's also something to learn, that you do need to have that for the device to function? Now, as it says up there, 20% of mobile medical equipment goes missing or is lost or stolen. So for example, as what Joe was mentioning, if a device is offline for a long time, it goes into a retired state, let's say it pops back on the wire, you can have an alert that not only says, hey, this device came back online, but here's its current location. So you can then quickly go track down that device, PM that device, and make sure it's safe and secure before it ever touches a patient.
Sometimes you have to be reminded, why is this important? Why does it matter? And the primary purpose of biomed engineers is to make sure that the devices are safe, that they're functioning appropriately, and that whenever they're used on a patient, that there's no patient harm. And cybersecurity introduces a new threat, a new risk to patient safety. And if you look at some of the statistics that have come out recently around cyber attacks and ransomware and how they actually impact clinical operations and patient care, when you look at that first week of an attack, you can see between 17 to 24% decrease in hospital volume. And that comes with usually a 40% decrease in emergency room usage. So our most critical patients, they're being diverted. The systems that are required for some of their care may not be available, or some of the patients may be hesitant coming to an organization that is, currently recovering from some type of cyber attack. So whenever you're looking at those types of impacts on the patient volumes and the availability of services, that can last for quite a while. On average, you see a 3-week recovery time to get back to just normal state. And there's usually some lingering tail where you might be back to normal, but there's still plenty of extra work that you are putting in as you're taking some of your workarounds and getting them back into the standard operating practice. So there's a lot of clinical impact, there's a lot of patient care impact, and that usually results in negative incomes or outcomes for patients. And you can see additional patients dying related to ransomware, somewhere around 42 to 67. That might be an indirect result, but it's still, we've seen the mortality rate for patients during those types of attacks are negatively impacted, and strokes increasing in those same time periods. Patient safety is paramount, and medical device security is patient safety. So whenever you're looking at the additional responsibilities and the work that comes with medical device security, understand the direct correlation that it has to patient safety and just the operational efficiency of your business, making sure that you can provide care in an efficient manner, especially in times where the budgets are always being scrutinized and everyone's trying to do more with less. So tools like Claroty's xDome are going to help you to take advantage of the technology that's available, and then you can embed the technology into your processes, get your people upskilled, and make sure that they're enabled to provide the best care they can to the devices that our patients depend on.
All right, so in terms of your personal growth and your program development, what other aspects can you as biomeds do with this more comprehensive inventory and asset discovery system? So you can do exposure management. So I hinted at this, but exposure management means essentially finding devices that are at a certain risk state. So maybe it has vulnerabilities on it that are active threat campaigns are known to be using those vulnerabilities, and that device is also exposed out to the internet. Well, that's a potential pathway into your organization that could create a breach, create a ransomware event. So you can do exposure management with a system like this. You can also do systematic network protection. So you can get into aspects of how do I put security controls around the device if that device, for example, cannot be patched, or maybe even with it being patched, the risk profile of that device is still pretty high, or that device is so critical to the operation of my environment that I need to add extra protection around that. This kind of system can advise how you can do that, as well as being able to track threats. So not only looking at risks, but looking at malware movement, virus movement, all those kinds of pieces using signatures and intrusion detection systems. Providing operational efficiency advancements, as we talked about in depth here, of not only being able to use this for security purposes or inventory management purposes, but also being able to use it to better allocate your own inventory, make procurement decisions, capacity planning, all those kinds of pieces. And then it can come into play as well with compliance and audits. So all of us have been through many audits in our healthcare environments, and these kind of systems can easily pull up and draw down the data that is needed in order to be compliant with those audits, and reduce the amount of time that it takes to collect that data. Now, as far as what can you do to further your career and learn more about cybersecurity and these kinds of aspects with regards to medical devices, there's professional development you can do through various organizations to get certifications. You can attend educational conferences and webinars like you're doing today, and you can learn more about IT integrations. Like, these systems not only collect data based off the network traffic, but they collect a lot of data through integrating with your other infrastructure in your organization. So learning about how those different pieces of your infrastructure function will only benefit you in terms of better understanding of how you can secure your systems and also make improvements. And lastly, staying current on regulations. You have FDA regulations are evolving. You have NIST that is evolving. HISAC has some regulations and guidance coming out of it. AMI has whole panels that write standards that feed into NIST and the FDA and everything. So staying abreast in those kind of pieces will also benefit you, because you're going to know what's coming down the pike, and you're going to be prepared for how is this going to then impact my future compliance audits and those kind of pieces, or requirements of what I need to maintain in terms of an inventory. And then lastly, understanding the key stakeholders across your organization. As we always say, cybersecurity is a team sport, healthcare is a team sport, medical devices team sport. I mean, you got to have all these different players working together, and you all are very well versed in this, I know, that you have to have aspects of your information security team, and your network engineering, your network security, your SOC team going in through incident response and alerts, your architecture teams in order to design how you're going to implement your systems and roll out new deployments, and then making sure you're in continual conversations with your clinical workers that you are supporting to understand how they're using the technology, and that can then inform to you how you can better support them, as well as supply chain, in terms of you now will have access to this kind of information that can benefit supply chain. So when you're making procurement decisions, make sure that supply chain is involved with that so that they can also take advantage of the insights that are in a platform like this. And lastly, legal and regulatory. You understand these medical device systems better than anyone in the organization. You understand the risks, you understand how they're used, and you understand what are the constraints of what these devices can and can't do. One of the pieces that I did at Mass General Brigham is I was actively involved in writing the policies and standards and procedures that were utilized across the organization, along with the rest of the information security team with all the ISOs and the CISO and architects and things like that. But it's very important to make sure that medical devices have a voice in these enterprise policies, because it's a unique case. Medical devices may not be able to follow the same controls that the rest of IT devices follow. They may have longer cycles in terms of being able to fix vulnerabilities, that it may not be realistic to say a critical patch has to be fixed in 1 week. Well, the vendor has to develop a patch that's certified for you to be able to install. So in that kind of a case, making sure going into policies that you have aspects of controls and what are the escalation points that can be followed that are unique to medical devices. And that is it. So we greatly appreciate you all attending today. We have our emails up on the screen. Please do not hesitate to reach out to Joe or I. We're happy to talk shop with you, whether it's about these topics or any other pieces related to healthcare. Doesn't have to be Claroty related. We can take our Claroty hats off and just talk shop about healthcare with you. So thank you, and looking forward to questions.
All right, guys, we did have a couple of questions that came in during the presentation, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. We will work through as many as time will allow, but attendees, here is one more reminder. You're welcome to submit your questions now using that question feature on your dashboard. First question, what does the implementation process look like for implementing a medical device security platform?
I'll take that one. So implementation process for a medical device security platform, it starts with visibility. So you're going to have to engage members from IT, especially on the network architecture side, because visibility starts with understanding the communication in your environment and using the network traffic to analyze and determine the devices that are communicating in your organization. So pulling in the network team, the architecture team, mapping out where the data collection points are that are going to provide the most value, talking to the infrastructure security team and finding what systems and tools they use to manage the environment. Those are additional integration opportunities where we can add context to the data that we're picking up from the network. The team that supports and manages your medical device inventory, you're going to want to work with them, make sure that they understand that there's an opportunity to send data back and forth between the system that's going to provide a lot of value. So whenever you're talking about what does it look like from a process perspective, the first part of it is just understanding who needs to be involved, what are my stakeholders, and then once you've identified your stakeholders, start the discussions, pull in the vendor to say, hey, here's what it looks like from our best practice implementation. Step 1, discover the network architecture. 2, determine what we need to deploy, get those sent out, get things connected, set up the service accounts for integrations, configure integrations, and then take a look at your data. Make sure that you have the visibility that you expect, and then make adjustments and changes with that analysis. And then once you get to that point, it's time to learn how to use the system. A lot of times people will bring in a system and it becomes shelfware. Obviously, whenever it comes to a security platform, that you don't want to sit there and have it go unused. So making sure that people are engaged in the training process is critical for actually operationalizing the platform once it's up and running. So that's kind of the last piece of implementation, is really training and making sure that the right people have accounts and access.
And just to add on to that, one of the challenges that customers that are deploying technologies like this run into often is the network architecture piece. And when we're talking about the network architecture piece, it's really about how can you feed that network data to an appliance system like this to be able to process that network data. And so do you have taps and spans and the ability to set those up in your environment? Do you have to have a whole architecture redesign in order to be able to support systems like that? Because these systems are only as good as the visibility that they have in your environment. So that is going to be the very first conversation you're going to be making if you're wanting to bring an appliance system like this in, is do we have the ability to comprehensively funnel the network traffic to a system like this? And there's creative, and bringing the vendor in on this is going to be critical, because there are creative ways that you can fill in gaps in areas that you may not have the ability to do a full layer 2 and layer 3 packets. Integrations can supplement it, and you also can have little mini collectors like that can run off of different areas. Maybe you have clinics and other sites that may not funnel through your main core of your network. So you may be able to stick a smaller collector there, or you can have a box that scans the environment in there and collects data on the inventory on the devices that are connected in that subnet. So that's the piece that I would emphasize first, is make sure that you bring in your network team early.
Well answered. Next question for you is, what are the most relevant cybersecurity risks on medical devices today?
Most relevant cybersecurity risks. So I think that it really is dependent on the function of the device type, but generally, in order to have a risk reduction, you want to make sure that device is fully patched and it doesn't have high risk vulnerabilities on it. It doesn't have default credentials. It is using a current certificate for communication. And ideally, it is on its own segmented network that is dedicated towards medical devices. The worst thing you can have for a vulnerable state of a device is have it essentially exposed to the internet on a flat network, lots of vulnerabilities, default configs, and just very few security controls in place on it. And Joe, you want to add a little to that as well?
Yeah, I would agree with pretty much everything you said. A lot of these devices run, standard commercial operating systems like Windows, and they may be running end of support, end of life operating systems. That usually isn't something that is by itself necessitating a device getting replaced. If the device still serves its clinical function and you can still support it, you're going to continue to use devices that have older operating systems, and those older operating systems come with the vulnerabilities that David was talking about. So those known vulnerabilities, they're likely to have exploits that are out there in the wild, and what you can do to most effectively deal with those is to work with your network architecture and security teams to put controls around it from an infrastructure perspective. So getting away from that flat network, using some form of effective macro or micro segmentation to address the communication attack vector risks. That's how I would, yeah.
And legacy medical devices, there are conferences that I've spoken at, for example, that are dedicated towards how do you tackle the evolving risk of legacy medical devices. I highly recommend looking up these conferences and attending them, because those are focused forums where you can really discuss these kind of devices that are end of life or out of support or have an operating system that can't be upgraded. What are the strategies that you can do to make sure that your environment and your healthcare organization as a whole is safe, as well as those devices themselves being safe?
Quickly got a couple of attendees that asked if you could mention any of the conferences.
So I don't remember the conference organizer, but there is a conference that I have spoken at that it literally is called legacy medical device security.
Great, thank you. Quick Google attendees, I'm sure you'll find some more information on that. Next question, how can resource-strapped biomedical engineering teams best achieve all of these use cases?
Yeah, so I'll take that one first. The best way to approach it is to understand what activities are going to have the most impact. So looking at it from an ROI perspective, how much time does it take to achieve a certain task, and what will you get out of that task? If you prioritize certain activities based off of how effective they will manage risk, then you can get to a tolerable risk level with the least amount of resources. So whenever we talk about these devices that have vulnerabilities, patching is usually one of the most manual and labor intensive activities. Not to say that you shouldn't try to patch vulnerabilities, but it will require the most resources to keep up with if you think you can even keep up with it. So that's when I would look to see what other opportunities exist that are more resource efficient, and that's when we start talking about putting controls on the network infrastructure, start utilizing some of the other controls that are in place potentially already, firewalls, network access control systems, things of that nature, so that if you have effective network segmentation in place, you might be able to say that you've cut off attack vectors for certain vulnerabilities. So while they may be present on a device, they're not exploitable. And when you've gotten to that state, then you can defer medical device patches until a PM cycle, for instance. So take advantage of the technologies that are scalable, and start there, looking at your highest risks first, because that's obviously the top priority. So that's how I would approach it.
Yeah, and like Joe was describing, what I describe with my customers is you have the big wheel and the small wheel. The small wheel is vulnerability management, and that really is, it's like playing whack-a-mole, and you're knock out one vulnerability that may be high risk on a device, but maybe that device has other high risk vulnerabilities. The overall risk score of that device is not going to decrease much. Whereas, but where that can come into play is incident response, emergency response. If there's an active threat campaign, or maybe your CIO or your CISO or somebody is aware of a certain vulnerability that's going through the web, then that's where you pull in discrete vulnerability response, and you're looking for devices with that specific CVE. Whereas the big wheel, it's much slower, but you're going to make a much bigger impact on your risk. And that big wheel is holistic device security. And that's when you're looking at a single device, looking at not only the vulnerabilities, but you're looking at all vulnerabilities on that device. You're looking at what compensating controls you can put on that device or around that device. So can you install an EDR on that device? Can you change passwords? Can you enable encryption? Can you integrate it with your domain through Active Directory? Can you put network controls around it? And looking at are there any other kind of insecure communications that are happening with it? So looking at that device holistically, it's a lot more effort, but you're going to long term make the biggest impact. And that's where you look at entire fleets and you say, all right, this fleet of this specific model of device is the largest risk to the devices that largest risk of the devices that I manage. I'm going to then look at how can I comprehensively reduce the risk of that entire fleet. And oftentimes you can zoom in on one device and then replicate it across your others, and use systems like this to then plan. One other piece that I did want to mention that I was just remembering about the conference piece for the legacy medical devices. Look up my colleague Michelle Jump. She is the CEO of a organization called MedSec. She is one of the organizers of these conferences, and she'll be able to tell you the exact conference name and the organizer that she works with.
And just to tie on one last thing to what can resource biomedical teams do to achieve these use cases, incorporate these activities into onboarding. so that whenever a new device gets brought into the environment, you have a hardening checklist so that you're changing default passwords and taking advantage of whatever controls are built into the device, making sure that you confirm that those are still in place whenever it comes in for preventative maintenance, and then use that preventative maintenance cycle as also your opportunity to apply updates and things of that nature. Just touch the device at least number of times possible.
All right, attendees, I know there are some of you waiting for your questions to be answered. I wanted to let everyone know any questions we don't get to, I'm going to send over to our presenters today directly following this presentation so they can follow up offline. But guys, let's see if we can get through one or two more. Is there a way to track locations on non-networked medical equipment?
So the challenge there is that you're not going to be having network packets getting sent to one of our collectors, for example. One way that you could track that is through RTLS systems, where you then integrate the gateway with a platform like this, and then through that gateway gather the location data. There are also tags that you can stick on medical devices or devices in general that are little Wi-Fi beacons, and then we will see the beacons natively inside of the network traffic. You would then still have to have some way to connect that beacon ID to the device itself, and that's where you could put in custom columns of data to then connect the whatever the MAC address, for example, of the beacon is to the specific device that it's attached to.
All right, we've got time for one more. This attendee did start by prefacing former Medigate user here. How have the new xDome AI features changed workflow for a biomed tech?
Yeah, so one of the things that we've implemented recently is an AI chatbot that makes it easier to get answers to your questions on how do you accomplish something within the dashboard. One of the things that we noticed is that the documentation, while available, sometimes can be hard to search through. So AI has been unlocked, so you can just ask a question, how do I do this? And then you get that answer pretty quickly. So just making sure that you know how to utilize the technology to its fullest is a little bit easier now. The next thing that's kind of, it was announced as a roadmap feature, but utilizing AI integration servers, MCP servers, to take advantage of any of the LLMs that your organization might already be using. That's something that's going to come up, and that's going to unlock a lot of great features. A very powerful way to add context from other systems that might be integrated with your LLMs as well. So really, it's an approach that is, we're not going to necessarily build in AI into every aspect of our platform, but we're going to become AI accessible and let you use the AI of your choice with the controls of your choice in place.
Perfect. All right. In the interest of time, since we're coming up on the top of the hour, gentlemen, I'm going to go ahead and send over the rest of the questions for your attention. I do want to thank both of you for a great and informative presentation today. I'd like to encourage all of our attendees to visit Claroty's website to learn more about the services and products that they provide our industry. Please do so by visiting Claroty.com. As promised, the answer to today's trivia question is Utah. So congratulations to our winner, Don Bass. A quick reminder, you can obtain your CE certificate by completing the post-webinar survey. That survey is going to come to you in 1 hour from right now. It will come via email. You do need to complete the survey before you can download your certificate. If you have any questions on the process, please reach out to us at webinar@mdpublishing.com. If you've missed any of our past webinars, including any by Claroty, please visit webinarwednesday.live to view our whole webinar archives. Thank you once again for your time today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your Wednesday afternoon. We'll see you back next week.